To understand the Confessions of St. Augustine, you have to understand that he isn't writing a memoir in the way we think of them today. He isn't just looking back at his life to tell a story, he is talking to God. The entire book is a prayer, a long, sprawling, deeply intimate conversation with the Creator. And because he's talking to God, the book doesn't just move through his years, it moves through his soul. He starts with a profound, almost unsettling idea. He says that God is closer to him than he is to himself. He suggests that while we spend our lives looking outward, searching for meaning in things we can touch or see, God is actually dwelling within the very center of our being. This leads to his most famous observation, that the human heart is inherently restless. He argues that we are all driven by a kind of spiritual hunger, a constant seeking, and that no matter how much we try to satisfy that hunger with pleasure, fame, or knowledge, we will never find peace until we find rest in God. Augustine uses his own life as the case study for this restlessness. He looks back at his infancy, seeing a kind of divine providence in his survival. But the tone shifts quickly as he enters his youth. He describes his childhood not as a time of innocence, but as a time of distraction. He was a bright child, a gifted student of rhetoric, but he saw his education as a way to chase worldly things rather than truth. He recalls a childhood marked by the pursuit of worldly eloquence and the distraction of pagan literature, which he later views as a diversion from divine truth. When he moves to Carthage for his studies, his life takes a much darker turn. He describes this period as a descent into what he calls shadowy loves. He was caught up in the sensory indulgence of the city, the theatre, the lust, the constant pursuit of physical pleasure. One of the most striking and unsettling scenes in the book is his account of stealing a group of pears from a neighbor's tree. He tells us quite clearly that he wasn't hungry. He didn't even want the fruit. He stole them simply for the sheer, perverse thrill of doing something wrong. He describes it as a way of mimicking God's power through a kind of maimed liberty, the idea that he could do whatever he wanted, just to feel the rush of rebellion. For Augustine, this was, sin for sin's sake, a distorted attempt to feel omnipotent by breaking the law simply because he could. This wasn't just a phase of teenage rebellion, it became a pattern. He entered into a long-term relationship with a woman, and for many years he lived a life that was intellectually sophisticated but spiritually hollow. He became drawn to Manichaeism, a religious movement that was very popular at the time. The reason he liked it was that it offered a very clean, logical explanation for the problem of evil. The Manichaeans believed in two equal and opposing forces, one good, one evil. To a young, ambitious man, this was an easy way out. If evil is just a substance, a physical thing that exists alongside good, then he didn't have to take responsibility for his own moral failings. He could just say he was caught in the middle of a cosmic war. But as he grew older and his intellect deepened, the Manichaean explanation started to feel shallow. He began studying Neoplatonism, which introduced him to the idea of an incorporeal, non-physical God. This was a massive intellectual leap. He could finally grasp the concept of a God who wasn't just a person in the sky, but a spiritual reality. Yet, he hit a wall. He realized that knowing about God intellectually was not the same as knowing God. He had the philosophy, but he didn't have the strength to change his life. He was stuck in a state of doubtful faith, caught between his intellectual recognition of Christian truth and his physical addiction to his old desires. Throughout this struggle, there was one constant presence in his life, his mother, Monica. She is a central figure in the narrative, a woman whose life was defined by her relentless, tearful prayers for her son. She followed him from Africa to Italy, watching him wander through different philosophies and different lifestyles, never giving up hope that he would return to the faith she held so dear. The turning point comes when Augustine moves to Milan. There he meets Bishop Ambrose. This is a crucial moment because Ambrose was a master rhetorician. For a man like Augustine, who valued eloquence above almost everything else, Ambrose's preaching was a revelation. Ambrose showed him that the scriptures weren't just nonsense or simple stories for uneducated people. They could withstand the highest levels of intellectual scrutiny. He began to dismantle Augustine's Manichaean biases, proving that faith and reason didn't have to be enemies. The climax of the book takes place in a garden in Milan. It is one of the most famous scenes in all of Western literature. Augustine describes being paralyzed by the conflict between his desire for a life of celibacy and his addiction to his sexual desires. He is weeping, completely broken by his own inability to change. In that moment of total vulnerability, he hears a voice from a nearby building, like a child chanting in a game. The voice says, "Tolla ledge, tolla ledge. Take up and read. Take up and read." He grabs a copy of the epistles of Paul and opens it to a passage commanding the casting off of lust and the putting on of Christ. In that moment, the struggle ended. He describes a sudden, overwhelming sense of peace and a sweetness in God that made all his previous cravings feel hollow and tasteless. His conversion wasn't just a change of opinion, it was a complete reordering of his soul. He resigned his prestigious teaching position, embraced his new faith, and the man who had spent his life chasing the applause of the world began a new life of service. The narrative then moves toward the end of his mother's life. He describes their final meeting with a sense of profound spiritual hope. They sat together in a garden, sharing a vision of a life beyond the physical world, and then she died. Augustine processes her death not as a finality, but as a transition, looking through the lens of the resurrection. As the book concludes, Augustine moves away from his personal history and begins to contemplate the nature of the universe itself. He moves from the I to the we, and finally to the he. He reflects on the mystery of creation, how God brought order to the void, and the mystery of time. He contemplates the Trinitarian movement of God Father, Son, and Spirit, who brought order to the formless void, just as grace brings order to the chaotic soul, leading the believer toward the eternal Sabbath of God's presence. This brings us to why this book matters so much, even 1500 years later. When we look at the analysis of his thought, we see the foundations of much of Western philosophy and theology. One of his most significant contributions is his way of looking at the problem of evil. Before Augustine, many people struggled with why a good God would allow evil to exist. As we noted earlier, he moved away from the idea that evil is a thing or a substance. Instead, he argued that evil is a privation, a lack or a corruption of something that is actually good. Just as blindness isn't a thing in itself, but rather the absence of sight, evil is the absence of good. This shifted the focus from a cosmic battle between two equal powers to the idea of human free will. For Augustine, evil enters the world when humans choose to turn away from the highest good toward lesser, finite things. He also tackled the nature of time in a way that still sounds modern. He argued that time isn't something that exists out there in the universe as a series of ticking marks. Instead, he suggested that time is a psychological phenomenon of the human mind. We have memory, which is the past, we have attention, which is the present, and we have expectation, which is the future. To us, time is a flow. But to God, there is no past or future. God exists in an eternal now. This allowed him to explain how God could be the creator of time without being subject to it. When you read the Confessions, you realize it's more than just a biography, it's an exploration of the human condition. Augustine is essentially asking, why are we so restless? Why do we keep reaching for things that don't satisfy us? Why is there so much chaos in our hearts and in our world? His answer is that we are finite creatures living in a world of change, trying to find something that is permanent. He argues that the very restlessness we feel is actually a compass. It is a divine pointer, a subtle nudge from the Creator telling us that we were made for something more than what we can see, touch, or achieve through our own intellect. The book ends with a sense of order. Just as God brought order to the formless chaos of creation, Augustine suggests that grace brings order to the chaotic soul. The journey from the theft of the pears to the quiet contemplation of the Trinity is a journey from fragmentation to wholeness. It's a story about a man who tried to build a life out of his own achievements and ended up finding that the only way to truly find himself was to lose himself in something much larger.